The room was quiet save for the steady hum of the medical oxygen concentrator nestled in the far corner, a small yet constant reminder of both life and frailty. Joseph Reid, a 67-year-old Vietnam veteran with a lifetime of memories etched into the lines of his face, reclined in his favorite armchair. The chair itself was a testament to years of use, its fabric worn thin, the cushioning softly indented by countless hours of solitude and reflection. Joseph's weathered hands rested in his lap, one clutching a small remote that adjusted the recliner's position. In the soft amber light that filtered through a nearby window, every detail of the room seemed to whisper stories of a bygone era, of battles fought overseas and quiet evenings spent in contemplative silence. Over the past few months, life had slowed to a measured crawl. Late-stage lung cancer had gradually sapped the strength from his body, leaving him with little more than memories and a determination to hold on to what remained. Each shallow breath, each measured heartbeat was a reminder that his time was drawing to a close, yet today something felt different. A subtle shift in the air that Joseph could not quite name until the unexpected ring of the telephone shattered the stillness. The sound was startling at first, yet it carried an undercurrent of comfort, as if an old friend had come calling at just the right moment. From the adjacent kitchen came the gentle voice of Linda, his wife, a petite woman with short hair streaked with graceful gray. She emerged from behind the counter, drying her hands on a dish towel, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and quiet anticipation. "You want me to get that, Joe?" she asked softly, a tone that had become their unspoken language over the decades. "Got it," Joseph replied, his voice roughened by time yet imbued with a surprising firmness. He hesitated for a heartbeat before rising his trembling fingers to pick up the cordless phone resting on a small table beside him. Though he had grown accustomed to silence and the company of memories, Joseph had always held fast to the belief that every call was worth answering, each a potential connection to a world that still spun outside his little haven. "Hello?" he said, his tone a mix of curiosity and exhaustion. Almost immediately a voice broke through the static on the line, a voice so familiar in its cadence and authority that it sent a jolt through him. "Is this Joseph Reid?" the caller inquired in a calm, deep tone, laden with a measured cadence that Joseph recognized instantly. His heart began to pound, and he sat a little straighter, each beat echoing the memories of battles fought both abroad and within. "This is," he managed, uncertainty warring with the inexplicable hope stirring in him. "Joseph, this is Donald Trump," the voice continued, each syllable crisp and unmistakable. "I heard about your story, and I wanted to take a moment to call you personally." For a long suspended moment, time seemed to slow. Joseph blinked, hardly daring to believe what his ears were hearing. He turned toward Linda, who had stopped in the doorway, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning recognition. "Is this really him?" she whispered, instinctively covering the receiver with a gentle hand. Her voice, hushed and trembling, carried the weight of years spent wondering if any news could ever reach them. "Joe, who is it?" Linda pressed softly, her face etched with both hope and uncertainty. Even as her mouth hovered close to the receiver, Joseph felt his heart hammer in his chest. For a veteran who had endured the perils of foreign jungles and the relentless march of time, the voice of the former president, a figure he had long admired from afar, was overwhelming. Gathering his courage, Joseph pressed on. "Well, Mr. President," he said with a mixture of reverence and cautious excitement, "I'm not sure what to say. This is unexpected." A light chuckle, almost disarming in its warmth, responded. "Sometimes, Joe, the best moments in life are the ones we don't expect," Trump remarked. "I've been told you've always supported me, and I wanted to thank you for that. I don't take it for granted." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Joseph felt the tremors in his hands lessen ever so slightly as he took in the significance of the moment. He glanced at Linda, whose eyes glistened with unspoken emotion. Tears that she had been holding back for so long now glimmered with both pride and sorrow. In that moment, Joseph felt something stirring inside him, a spark of hope, fragile yet persistent, amidst the twilight of his life. But a question quickly took root. Why me? His thoughts raced, muddled by memories of wartime valor and the quiet despair that followed the loss of friends and loved ones. Who was he, a retired mechanic living out his final days in a modest home in Topeka, Kansas, to receive a call like this? Yet the voice on the other end was as unmistakable as it was sincere, a voice that had echoed through countless television sets, speeches, and public events. "Thank you, Mr. President," Joseph managed, his voice cracking ever so slightly, weighted by years of unspoken grief and hard-fought battles. "I've always believed in what you stand for. It's an honor to hear from you." A thoughtful pause followed before Trump's tone shifted, deepening in seriousness. "Joseph," he said, "I've read about your service in Vietnam." At the mention of Vietnam, memories flooded Joseph's mind, a time when life was defined by the relentless heat of the jungle, the sound of helicopter blades slicing through humid skies, and the enduring bond between brothers in arms. "Yes, sir," Joseph replied, sitting a little taller, as though the mere recollection of his military past granted him a brief moment of vigor, though he had long since set aside the horrors of war. The scars, both physical and emotional, remained ever vivid in his mind. They were part of him, shaping his identity long after the echoes of gunfire had faded. "You sacrificed so much for this country," Trump continued, his voice imbued with a gravitas that lent weight to every word. "I've always said that our veterans are the backbone of this nation, and you, Joseph, are living proof of that." A lump formed in Joseph's throat. He was not used to being the subject of such admiration, especially not from someone of Trump's stature. For years he had carried the burden of battle wounds that no medal could fully honor, the loss of friends, the struggle to readjust to a peaceful existence, and the quiet grief for the life that could have been. Now, to hear words of gratitude directed toward him was almost too much to bear. Trump's curiosity was unabated. "Tell me about your life after the service," he prompted gently. "I want to know about the man behind the uniform." Joseph hesitated. Self-reflection had never been his strong suit. He was a man of action more than words, yet something about Trump's calm inquiry coaxed him out of his reserve. "Well," he began slowly, "after the war I came back to Kansas. I married my high school sweetheart Linda. We've been together for 45 years now, through thick and thin." His eyes softened as he spoke of Linda, the steadfast companion who had shared his journey through both joy and sorrow. "I worked as a mechanic for most of my life. I eventually opened my own shop. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills and put food on our table." A brief silence settled over the line before Trump inquired about family. "And your kids?" A shadow passed over Joseph's face, a memory too painful to fully articulate. "We had one boy, Matthew," he said quietly. He lost his life in Iraq back in 2005. The admission was heavy, with a lifetime of grief. Joseph had grown accustomed to the ache of that loss. It was a wound that never quite healed, a silent companion through every moment of his life. Yet it was a part of his story, an indelible mark on the fabric of his existence. There was a pause, an unspoken acknowledgement of shared pain, before Trump spoke again, his voice steady but imbued with empathy. "Joseph, I can't imagine the pain of losing a child. You've given so much to this country, and yet here you are, still standing." At those words, a single tear traced a path down Joseph's weathered cheek. "Some days, it feels like I'm not," he admitted softly, the truth of his struggle laid bare in that whispered confession. "But you are," Trump countered, his tone firm yet compassionate. "You're a survivor, Joseph, and the world needs to hear stories like yours." The conversation began to flow like a meandering river, filled with memories both bitter and bittersweet. Joseph's mind drifted back to long-forgotten days in the jungle, the relentless heat, the camaraderie of men who had become brothers. He recalled the promise of a better future that had carried him through the darkness, only to be replaced by a quieter, slower pace in his later years. The phone call, unexpected and surreal, was now a lifeline, a reminder that even in the twilight of life, the echoes of one's sacrifices could still inspire hope. Clearing his throat, Joseph pressed on. "You know, Mr. President, a lot of people don't understand what it means to sacrifice for this country. It's not just the time or the pain. It's the knowledge that you may never come back the same, if you come back at all." For a long moment, silence enveloped the line, a silence so profound it seemed to stretch out between two worlds, one of raw, unfiltered history and another of modern reflection. Then Trump's voice, usually so brisk and confident, softened as if revealing a rarely seen vulnerability. "Joseph, I think about that more than people realize. I think about what you and men like you have given up so that people like me can have a chance to lead. It's humbling." The sincerity in Trump's tone surprised Joseph. Here was a man who had often been seen only as a titan of industry and politics, a figure larger than life, now speaking in a way that was almost intimately personal. "This side of you is disarming," Trump continued. "My father always taught me that success isn't measured by money or power, but by the legacy we leave behind. Hearing your story reminds me why I fight so hard, not just for policies, but for people." Joseph's eyes closed as the words sank in. He had spent years feeling like a relic, a faded memory, overshadowed by the bustle of modern life. Yet here, in this unexpected conversation, he was reminded that every sacrifice, every battle fought on distant shores or in the quiet moments at home, had meaning. "You've got your share of critics," Joseph said cautiously. "But I've always believed you cared about this country. That's why I supported you." "I know," Trump replied, his voice measured and introspective. "And I've seen my share of battles too. Not the kind you fought on a dusty battlefield, but the ones that test your spirit, your resolve." Joseph hesitated, then ventured, "What kind of battles, sir?" There was a brief pause, a moment of silence heavy with memories, before Trump spoke again. "I don't discuss this often," he admitted, "but losing my brother, Fred, was one of the hardest things I've ever faced. Fred was a good man who fought demons that eventually got the best of him." The revelation, unexpected and intimate, deepened the connection between them. Joseph felt a surge of empathy. Though he had known little of Trump's personal struggles beyond what the public had seen, this glimpse into his private pain made the man on the other end of the line all the more real. "I'm sorry to hear that," Joseph said softly, his voice tinged with genuine sorrow. "Thank you for sharing that. Fred taught me about resilience, about not giving up even when everything seems impossible," Trump said, his tone reflective. "And I think that's why your story resonates with me. You've lived through so much, and yet you're still here, still fighting." Joseph managed a weak chuckle, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not sure I'm fighting anymore, Mr. President. Some days, it feels more like I'm just trying to hold on." "Isn't that the real fight?" Trump countered gently. "Holding on when the world is telling you to let go. Every day you wake up and face your pain, you win a battle." Those words struck a chord deep within Joseph. For years he had seen his life as a series of losses, lost comrades in distant jungles, the precious loss of his son, and the gradual erosion of his health. Perhaps survival itself was a kind of victory, one that went unnoticed amidst the clamor of grand historical narratives. In that quiet moment, he began to understand that his life, filled with quiet heroism and unspoken courage, mattered more than he had ever allowed himself to believe. As the conversation continued, memories of his past, both glorious and tragic, swirled in his mind like autumn leaves caught in a gentle breeze. He recalled long nights spent by the flickering light of a kerosene lamp after returning from Vietnam, when he and his comrades would share stories of home and hope despite the backdrop of war. He remembered the sound of Linda's laughter, a melody that had sustained him through the darkest days, and the warmth of her hand as she always urged him to keep fighting, even when he felt he could fight no longer. I never thought that someone like you would take the time to ask about me," Joseph confessed, his voice barely above a whisper as he fought back the tide of memories. "I'm just an old man trying to make peace with the time I have left." "But you're more than that, Joseph," Trump said firmly. "You are a reminder of what this country is built on. Resilience, sacrifice, and hope. I think the world needs to hear your story. It's a story of courage in the face of insurmountable odds." For a moment the line was quiet except for the gentle hum of the oxygen concentrator in the background. A steady, comforting rhythm that echoed the pulse of a life determined to keep beating, however faintly. Joseph's eyes drifted to the wall across the room, where a collection of medals and faded photographs chronicled the life he had led. There was a bronze star gleaming in a small frame, a black and white photo of him and his platoon, smiling broadly despite the hardships etched into their faces, and next to those a neatly folded American flag that symbolized a lifetime of service and sacrifice. Each artifact was a chapter in a story that had been written in sweat and tears, in victories and losses, and in moments of profound, unyielding hope. "You know," Joseph began again, his voice steadier now, "after the war I built my life piece by piece. I started as a mechanic, and eventually I opened my own shop here in Topeka. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And Linda, she was always the light, guiding me when the days grew dark." Linda, who had been quietly watching from the doorway, stepped forward, her hand gently resting on his arm. "Joe," she said softly, "you built more than a shop. You built a life, a home. And no matter what happens, you're not alone." Her words, filled with unyielding love and support, lent strength to Joseph's voice. "I suppose you're right, Linda. Sometimes it takes a call like this to remind me that even when I feel invisible, there are people out there who see me." Trump's voice broke in once more, filled with a resolve that was both personal and transcendent. "Joseph, I want you to know that your story isn't just about the past. It's about the legacy you leave behind. Every time you share your truth, you inspire others to keep fighting. That's why I'm calling today. Because your life matters and your voice can make a difference." As the minutes turned into what felt like an eternity of shared understanding, Joseph's trembling hands slowly steadied. His mind, once clouded by the despair of lost battles and fading health, began to clear, as if the warmth of Trump's words had kindled a spark of determination. "Mr. President," he said softly, "I've always thought of my life as a series of unfortunate events, losses that have defined me. But maybe there's still something left for me to give." "There is, Joseph," Trump replied without hesitation. "Your resilience, your sacrifice, they're lessons for us all. You're not just surviving, you're living, and that is a victory in itself." The conversation continued, a dialogue that transcended politics and personal loss. Trump asked questions about Joseph's time in Vietnam, about the small town in Kansas that had been his refuge, and about the quiet moments that defined a man's life after the roar of battle had faded. In each answer, Joseph found himself dredging up memories he had long tucked away, moments of valor and pain, of camaraderie and loneliness. He spoke of the nights when the only light came from a small lamp in a cramped barracks, of the taste of dust and sweat that lingered long after the gunfire had ceased. He recalled the faces of those who had fallen beside him, their memories forever etched in his heart, and the silent gratitude he felt for having returned home. As the conversation deepened, it became clear that this call was more than just an unexpected moment of connection. It was a turning point, a chance for Joseph to rediscover his worth and to see that even the quietest lives carried echoes of heroism. Trump's own vulnerabilities, shared with a candid honesty, further bridged the distance between two very different men, one defined by the scars of war, and the other by the weight of leadership and loss. By the time the call drew to a close, the room seemed to glow with a gentle, newfound light. Joseph set the phone down with hands that were still trembling but now steadied by resolve. Linda moved to his side, wrapping her arms around him, her presence a constant reminder that he was never truly alone. "You needed that, Joe," she murmured, her voice tender and unwavering. "You needed someone to remind you that your story still matters." In the quiet aftermath of the call, as the oxygen concentrator hummed its steady tune and the late afternoon sun filtered through the window, Joseph sat in silence. The conversation had awakened something inside him, a realization that despite the slow decay of his body, his spirit was still alive and capable of inspiring change. His life, with all its hardships and heartaches, was not a tale of defeat, but a chronicle of resilience, sacrifice, and, ultimately, in the days that followed, the impact of that singular call began to ripple outward. Joseph found himself swept into a current of attention he had never sought, yet one that brought with it a surprising and bittersweet validation. With Linda's gentle encouragement, he decided to share his story with a local news station. The process was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking, a journey into the spotlight that forced him to confront decades of memories he had long kept hidden away in the recesses of his heart. The interview was filmed in his modest living room, where every object, from the faded armchair to the well-worn photos lining the walls, served as a testament to a life lived fully, albeit quietly. As the camera rolled, Joseph recounted his experiences in Vietnam, the pain of losing his son, and the unexpected phone call that had rekindled a flame of hope. His voice, though occasionally trembling, grew steadier as he realized that his story could touch lives, that his struggles were not in vain. The segment, titled "A Veteran's Legacy, the Call That Changed Everything," aired to an outpouring of support that stretched far beyond the borders of Topeka. Letters and emails began to arrive, messages from fellow veterans, from families who had also lost loved ones, and even from strangers who found solace in Joseph's words. One video in particular, recorded by a young man in his car, went viral. In it, the young man, with tears streaming down his face, spoke about how Joseph's story had given him the courage to keep fighting through his own dark days. "I saw your story, Mr. Reid," the young man said, his voice raw with emotion, "and it reminded me that even in the hardest times there is hope. Thank you for showing us that our struggles matter." For Joseph, each message was a lifeline, a reminder that every sacrifice, every battle fought, had woven together a tapestry of resilience that could inspire others. Linda read every letter aloud in their small living room, and together they marveled at the impact of the simple, heartfelt conversation that had taken place over the phone. Slowly, Joseph began to see that his identity was not solely defined by the scars of war or the grief of loss. Instead, his life was a mosaic of triumphs and tragedies, of quiet victories and everyday acts of bravery. As weeks turned into months, invitations to speak at veterans groups, schools, and community centers began to pour in. Although his declining health made travel difficult, Joseph found creative ways to connect. Through virtual meetings and local gatherings where he could share his story and encourage others to find strength in their own struggles, his narrative became a symbol of hope, a beacon for those who felt overlooked and forgotten. At one community event in a modest town hall, Joseph sat on a simple wooden chair in front of a small, attentive crowd. With Linda by his side, he spoke about the day he received that unexpected call, a moment that had forced him to confront his own worth and the value of every lived experience. "I've spent most of my life feeling like I was fading into the background," he confessed, his voice resonating with quiet determination. "But that day, I realized that even the smallest voice can echo far beyond its immediate circle." Your stories, our stories matter, because they remind us that even in our darkest moments, there is a light that can guide us forward. His words touched many hearts, and that night, as he sat in the quiet of his home, Joseph reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The struggles he had faced were numerous: the ghosts of war, the unbearable grief of losing his son, the slow but steady deterioration of his health. But each challenge had forged a strength that he now recognized as something extraordinary. It was not the absence of pain that defined him, but the relentless spirit with which he continued to rise day after day, despite the odds. Back at home in Topeka, life settled into a new rhythm. The call from Donald Trump, once a surreal anomaly, had become the spark that lit a renewed sense of purpose in Joseph. He resumed his quiet routines with an inner light that surprised even him. In the mornings, as the early sun painted golden hues across the worn armchair and the faded walls of his living room, Joseph would sit and reflect on the memories of his youth. Memories of long-forgotten victories and bittersweet farewells. Linda, ever his steadfast partner, watched with quiet pride as her husband began to see himself not as a man nearing the end, but as a beacon for others who struggled to find hope. Even as his body grew frail, Joseph began to share more than just his wartime recollections. He opened up about the small, everyday battles, about the loneliness of an empty house after his son's departure, about the bittersweet taste of victory in small moments of laughter, and about the enduring love that Linda had so generously given him over the decades. Every shared memory became a testament to a life of sacrifice and the enduring beauty of human connection. One crisp autumn day, as the wind whispered through the Kansas plains outside their window, the phone rang again. This time it was not a political figure, but Sarah, a young producer from a major news outlet who had heard of Joseph's story and wanted to produce a special segment titled "The Legacy of a Soldier's Story." Sitting in his living room, surrounded by decades of memories, Joseph listened as Sarah explained how his journey had touched countless lives. "I'm no hero," he insisted, his voice humble yet resolute. "I'm just a man who did his duty." But Sarah's reply was simple and powerful. "That's exactly why your story matters, because it shows that ordinary people can do extraordinary things." The segment aired a week later, and it resonated with audiences far and wide. In every home where the story was shared, there was a moment of silence, a moment to honor the quiet heroism of a man who had faced unimaginable losses yet continued to stand tall. The interviews, the footage of him in his modest home, and the heartfelt words of those he had inspired created a ripple effect that could not be ignored. The news outlets, social media platforms, and community gatherings buzzed with discussions about sacrifice, resilience, and the true meaning of legacy. Soon, invitations began to flood in from veterans organizations, schools, and even national foundations dedicated to supporting those who had sacrificed for their country. Though Joseph's health was fragile, his spirit soared each time he was reminded that his experiences could help others find their own strength. He began to record short video messages, each one a piece of his soul, to be shared with a generation that, too often, felt disconnected from the sacrifices of the past. His messages were simple. Your struggles matter, your sacrifices define you, and no matter how hard the journey, there is always hope. Linda, who had long been the silent guardian of Joseph's quiet victories, now became an active partner in ensuring his legacy would be preserved. She organized small gatherings where neighbors and old friends would come together to listen to Joseph's stories, share their own, and create a community where every sacrifice was honored. The local newspaper ran a series of articles that chronicled his life, and soon his story became a staple in discussions about the true cost of war and the enduring spirit of those who survive it. On a cool winter evening, as snow gently blanketed the quiet streets of Topeka, Joseph sat by the window with Linda by his side, listening to the distant hum of the oxygen concentrator, a constant reminder of his frailty, yet also a steady beat of life. He thought back to the day he had received that surreal phone call from Donald Trump. In that unexpected moment, he had been reminded that even a life filled with hardships could spark hope in others. The memory was bittersweet, a blend of past sacrifices, personal grief, and the surprising possibility of redemption. He realized that his story was more than a series of losses. It was a testament to resilience, to the enduring nature of the human spirit, and to the belief that every life, no matter how seemingly insignificant, could make a profound difference. As the years passed and the seasons changed, Joseph's health gradually waned. Yet, even as his body grew weaker, his legacy continued to strengthen. His recorded messages, his interviews, and the countless letters of gratitude that poured in became a living archive, a tribute to a man who had lived through the worst of humanity's struggles and emerged with a gentle, guiding light for others. His final public appearance was a quiet ceremony held at a local veterans memorial, where Joseph, sitting in his favorite chair with Linda at his side, shared one last message of hope before stepping away from the spotlight. In that poignant moment, as he spoke of sacrifice, loss, and the possibility of healing, there was not a single dry eye in the room. The legacy of Joseph Reid, the quiet hero, the Vietnam veteran, the loving husband, and the gentle soul who had found a spark of hope in his darkest hour, had been cemented in the hearts of all who had listened. His words, echoing through the halls of that modest memorial, were a final reminder that every voice mattered and that even the smallest act of resilience could inspire countless others. When Joseph passed away a few weeks later, the outpouring of love and remembrance was overwhelming. Veterans from across the country, neighbors, and strangers alike gathered to honor his life. Linda, though stricken with grief, found solace in knowing that her husband's legacy would live on. In her heart, she carried the memory of his gentle smile, his steadfast courage, and the way he had managed to find hope even in the face of overwhelming sorrow. In his final request, Joseph had urged her to continue sharing his story, not for him alone, but for every person who had ever felt forgotten. Linda, with quiet resolve and deep love, promised that his legacy would endure, becoming a beacon for those still searching for meaning in their own lives. As the days turned to weeks and the nation slowly began to heal from its collective losses, Joseph's story was retold in countless forms: documentaries, articles, heartfelt social media posts, and even in classrooms where students learned about the true cost of war and the resilience of the human spirit. The man who had once sat alone in a quiet room in Topeka had become a symbol, a reminder that every sacrifice, every hardship could serve as a stepping stone toward a more compassionate, understanding world. And so, Joseph Reid's life, from the steady hum of an oxygen concentrator in a modest living room to the grand stage of national memory, became an enduring testament to the power of sharing one's truth. His voice, soft yet unwavering, continued to echo in the hearts of those who had once felt lost in the shadows of their own struggles. It was a legacy of hope, a reminder that even when all seems lost, there remains within each of us the strength to carry on, and that every life, no matter how quietly lived, has the power to change the world. If Joseph's story has taught us anything, it is that the simplest moments, a phone call, a kind word, a shared memory, can ignite the flame of hope in the most unexpected places. It is a story of courage and quiet determination, of a man who faced life's greatest challenges with a resolve that never wavered, even in the face of loss and despair. It reminds us that every voice matters, that every sacrifice is significant, and that even in the twilight of life, there is a light that can guide us all. For those who have listened to Joseph's tale, his legacy lives on in the stories that continue to be shared, in the letters of gratitude that are read aloud in quiet living rooms, and in the gentle reminders that hope, like the steady hum of an oxygen concentrator, endures against all odds. In the end, as the nation moved forward and new stories emerged, the legacy of Joseph Reid remained a cornerstone, a symbol of the enduring human spirit. His life, marked by the echoes of war and the quiet moments of personal triumph, served as a reminder that while we may all face our own battles, it is in the act of sharing our stories that we truly connect, inspire, and ultimately heal. And so, Joseph Reid's voice, once just a quiet whisper in a modest living room, became a clarion call for resilience, sacrifice, and the eternal hope that binds us all. If this story has touched you, may it also inspire you to honor the sacrifices of those who have come before, and to share your own truth with the world, for every life lived is a story worth telling, and every voice, no matter how quiet, has the power to light the way forward.